Good morning and welcome to Ceramic Storytime with Sue. Today we are going to go through my blog post called A Week in the Life of a Ceramic Studio Technician. So if you're joining me live, please just let me know that you can see and hear me. Say hi in the comments. Let me know where you are joining me from today. And I'm just going to make sure I'm live. Last week I had some technical difficulties, so just going to make sure everything's working the way that I hope. And also, if you are joining me live and you would like to comment and you would like me to see your name attached to your comment, I'm going to just post a link that you can click that gives me permission, or gives the software that I'm using permission to show me your name, just because of privacy issues. So let me just post that comment. So I just posted that link in the comments. So if you want to click that link, totally up to you, but that will allow me to see your name if you're interacting with me while we're live today. I see Deb from Zionsville, Indiana, I believe. Hi, Deb. And then Tolga. Hi, Tolga from Istanbul. Lovely. Great video and audio. Awesome. Okay, I'm so glad everything's working. And I am, so we're going to read my blog post, A Week in the Life of a Ceramic Studio Technician. Now, if you want to follow along, the link that's scrolling across the bottom of the screen is bit.ly/week of a ceramics tech, all one word at the end. So you can click that link and then that will bring you to the blog post. And I'm just going to pull up the blog post on my screen and I'm going to hide this. How do I hide? I'm trying to hide this title on my screen because it's kind of in my way. Let's see. It's not. This software that I'm using, it keeps changing things on me. So I'm just trying to make some changes here. Okay. There we go. So that just gives a little more of my screen, and then I'm going to share. So this is the blog post that I'll be reading for you today. So if you go to bit.ly/week of a ceramics tech, you can follow along, and then you can also download this post as a PDF and save it to your files and keep it as a reference if you find it helpful. So let's get started. As some of you know, I've been a ceramic studio technician for the past 6 years, since 2015. I wrote this post about a year ago now. So it was pre-COVID, where everything was still normal and our programs were all full and we were super busy. So all of that has changed now. Things look a little different at the studio now, but hopefully we're going to get back to the way, kind of the way things were. So this is just basically, I took a week, and I only work 3 days a week. So I took a week of work and I just journaled everything that I did during that week so I could share it with you, so you could understand like kind of the day-to-day tasks that go into running a public pottery studio as the technician. And so, yeah, we unload kilns and mix glazes, but then there's also a lot of other things that you may or may not find interesting. So I'm going to share that with you today. All right. What does a ceramic studio technician do? Since 2015, I've been a ceramic studio technician at a community pottery studio. After working full-time for 4 years, I cut my hours back to 3 days a week so I could focus more on teaching and blogging. The pottery studio is at Cedar Hill Rec Centre in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. Since it's a public facility, we're fortunate to be able to keep our programs very affordable and accessible to all ages and levels of experience, and boy, are we busy. We run 14 classes per week for both adults and children. We also have an open studio drop-in program where 60 registered members can access the studio anytime the building is open and we're not running classes. We're open 7 days a week, and this amounts to over 100 weekly hours of studio access that the drop-ins get, or they used to before the pandemic. All of our programs are overflowing with long wait lists. Our drop-in program fills up within minutes of registration opening. The pottery community is alive and well in Victoria, BC, and our studio simply can't keep up with the demand for studio access. We have 4 technicians on staff, and there is at least one of us working every day. We also have a team of teachers who teach the classes and volunteers who help us keep the studio clean and organized. Collectively, the volunteers contribute around 20 hours per week to the studio and receive studio access in return for their service. As the head studio technician, it's my job to make sure the studio has everything it needs to run our programs and keep the studio running smoothly and efficiently. This includes loading and unloading the kilns, mixing and maintaining glazes, slips, and stains, processing the clay reclaim with our Peter Pug Mill, sorting and organizing all the pots that are produced in the studio, taking inventory and ordering clay, glaze materials, tools, and equipment, fixing and maintaining kilns, wheels, slab roller, pug mill, spray gun, etc., firing the gas and raku kilns, leading a team of volunteers, giving studio orientations and spray booth tutorials to new users, writing and updating operating procedures and studio guidelines, and then various administrative tasks. And in brackets, I wrote too many because those aren't my favorite, but it's part of the job. I really love my job. It's very hands-on, and I get to see thousands of pieces of pottery go through all the stages of making, bisque firing, glazing, and glaze firing. I learned so much about clay and glazes by watching people try new things and seeing what makes them succeed or why they might fail. I also get to test and experiment with new glaze and slip recipes and troubleshoot problems as they arise. This is my favorite part. When I first started working at the studio in 2015, a bunch of the glazes were quite runny at our firing temperature. Some of them had to be super thin if you didn't want them to run. Requiring a thin application isn't very beginner-friendly, so I used my knowledge of the UMF, the Unity Molecular Formula, to reformulate the recipes so they could be applied thicker without running. I also learned all about specific gravity and flocculation because I was searching for a way to keep the water content of our studio glazes consistent. I was tired of estimating how much water to add and conflicting opinions of which glazes were too thick and too thin. I wanted a calculated system that all the technicians could use and get the same result. Thankfully, through a bunch of research, I discovered the process of measuring specific gravity. This was the answer that I was looking for. So now we have a routine where we measure the specific gravity of all our glazes on a monthly basis so they stay consistent. This type of problem solving, troubleshooting, and improving the glazes for studio users has been the highlight of my job over the years. A behind-the-scenes look at my behind-the-scenes job. I thought it would be fun to document all the things I do in a week as a ceramic studio technician and share a behind-the-scenes look into my day job. A ceramic studio technician performs all the tasks that need to happen outside of the making and glazing process. The teachers teach, the users make, and the technicians do the rest. If you make pots in a community studio or school, you may find it interesting to know what the technicians do all day. If you're a technician yourself, You may find it interesting to hear what another technician does all day. Or you may just be interested to compare all of your own behind-the-scenes studio tasks with those of a public studio. Either way, I hope you find it interesting. My work week is Tuesday to Thursday from 8 to 3:30 p.m. with a half-hour lunch. So, day 1. It snowed on my commute this morning. First snow of the year, but it was melted by the time I finished work. It also took me an hour and 40 minutes to get to work today. It usually takes 50 to 75 minutes. I live 34 kilometers away. This was my longest commute yet. Sheesh. Today is my first day back after a week off. I had a bunch of emails to respond to. Questions about what kind of underglazes are permitted in the studio. Correspondence about purchasing a new Blau front loader kiln. I know, awesome, right? If you've never heard of Blau kilns, I recommend that you Google them. They're pretty amazing. We're still in the process of deciding whether we're going to upgrade our kilns and get a Blau front loader gas kiln. So hoping that kind of the pandemic has kind of put that on hold, but that's exciting for the studio in the future, hopefully. Our new slab roller purchase order has been submitted. Our ceramics monthly subscription is up for renewal, and I need to submit my P-card receipts to the finance department. Moving on, I read through our technician communication book to catch up on everything that went on since my last shift. For example, the sink traps are full. So if you can see in this picture here, I don't know if you can, oh, there you can see my arrow now. So we have these wonderful stainless steel sinks. They're really long with these handy flexible sprayers. And then below the sink, we have these traps that trap the clay and glaze materials so that we can safely rinse off, rinse our splash pans, rinse all of our tools and everything in the sink. And then there's a trap, a basin below the sink that catches all of the solid particles, and then the water drains off the top. So the sink traps are full. So then we get a company called Roto-Rooter to come in, and then they suck out all the sludge from the sink traps. Our new hallway display cabinets finally arrived, which we were waiting for months. The gingerbread houses got bisque fired in time for glazing class. Phew. So that's always a good thing. The gas kiln was full. Kiln A underfired. So we have 2 top loader electric kilns, A and B. And so kiln A underfired. So whenever a kiln underfires, then we always want to make note of that and then see if it's a pattern. So usually if a kiln underfires once, I leave it for the next firing. And if it underfires twice in a row, then I'll make some adjustments to the firing schedule. Tolga says, all the luck on the Blau front. Yes, I know. I hope that goes through. And then maintenance is looking for the wedging wires that were removed when we removed the canvas from our wedging counter. So yeah, a couple of years ago, maybe now, we decided that we were going to be a canvas-free studio. So in this photo, this is still when we had canvas on our table in the center of the studio. So we replaced that tabletop. First, we started with birch plywood, which was horrible. It was recommended so many times in all the Facebook groups that I went into researching for surfaces for a community studio. So we got this birch plywood. It just like within a couple of weeks, it started bubbling. The whole top of the surface bubbled, and like the veneer on the top was peeling back. So we ended up, after about a year of that, we replaced that birch plywood with, it's an acacia wood. It's like a hardwood butcher block countertop. And that has been amazing. So we oil it once a year, and it's great. It can get wet. We try to keep it dry, of course, but we've had none of that bubbling of the surface peeling back. So that has been great. Tolga asks, was the ply marine grade? No. So that was that was something that was mentioned after the fact, so that we might have just made a mistake and got the wrong type of birch plywood. So yeah, if you're looking to replace your canvas with a different type of surface. And the reason we did that is because the canvas, all the dust gets trapped underneath, and then mildew, when we pulled that canvas back off of the table, and it had been there for years, it was gross. It was black and moldy. So we decided we just wanted a surface that was easier to clean and keep the dust out. So yeah, perhaps a marine grade birch plywood would work better than whatever we ended up getting. So that is a thought. Yeah, so the acacia wood, the hard wood, it's like a butcher block countertop surface that has been working really well for us. Okay, I went through a large order of tools and supplies that we received while I was away to make sure that everything arrived as ordered. A couple of things were not quite right, so I had to email our supplier to see about fixing the order. And then my volunteer arrived, and she filled the pug mill with recycled clay. She sorted and cleaned the throwing and trimming toolboxes. She sieved a glaze, and then she labeled a bunch of our new tools with Sharpie or nail polish before putting them out for use. Then I restocked our pottery tools shop at the front desk with some new mud sponges and chamois. So we sell tools. We just have like a very small display cabinet with some throwing and trimming tools. So if people, if their tools break or if our tools are dull or whatever, they can buy their own tools from us. I checked the firing logs for kiln A that underfired. It hadn't underfired previously, so I'm going to leave the firing schedule as is. If it underfires twice in a row, I'll increase the peak temperature. And so these are the witness cones from kiln A that had underfired. So this is cone 5, this is cone 6, and then cone 7. So you can see cone 6 is just barely starting to bend. So I want cone 6 to look like cone 5 over here pretty much. So I would consider that underfired. So we keep track of that. If it happens twice in a row, then I would increase the top temperature of our firing schedule. A test tile from the freshly mixed batch of our blue-green glaze came out of the kiln green instead of blue-green. Yay, a glaze problem. I go into glaze problem-solving mode. So the kiln had underfired. Could that be the reason? I doubt it, but I will test. Was it a new bag of copper? No, it wasn't. Was there too much copper oxide added? This is the most likely scenario. So I dipped another test tile of the existing glaze batch to fire it again to the correct temperature. If the new test comes out looking right, then the lower temperature was likely the issue. I also made a new 500-gram test size batch of the glaze with half the copper oxide, and then I dipped a test tile. I increased the copper oxide to its full percentage, and then I dipped another test tile. If these tests come out looking right, then likely too much copper was added to that larger batch. And so whenever we mix a new batch of glaze in the studio, we always dip a test tile and fire it before we add that glaze to the studio to be used. So in this case, 99% of the time, the tests come out perfect, and then we just dump the new glaze into the main bucket. But in this case, we had some investigating to do. So If these tests come out looking right, then likely too much copper was added. If that's the case, I'll fix the funky batch by making a new batch of equal size without any copper, and then I'll mix it with the funky batch. This will cut the copper of the funky batch in half and hopefully return the glaze to its intended blue-green color. So here we have the tile on the left. This is what the glaze is supposed to look like. And then the tile on the right, this was the funky batch. So now that we're in the future, I know that this batch did have too much copper. And so we just mixed another batch with no copper, combined them together, which cut the copper in half, and then everything was good. So then I discussed wheel heights with one of the drop-in users who asked if they could all be set to their tallest height to prevent hunching over. Another potter came in and sat down at one of the shorter wheels, so I asked her what she prefers. She said she didn't realize there were different heights. So I'll pull more potters who choose the shorter wheels to see if they prefer them shorter or whether we should raise them all to their tallest height. So it turns out that some people prefer the wheel to be shorter, and then some people like the wheel to be taller. So we just have them set at different levels so people can choose the wheel that they want. So this is a photo of half of our wheels. And then there's another row on the other side of here. And are weird flexi lights that look like antennae. So these are like flexible lights that you can put over your pieces, and so you can get a good, and you can have good lighting right where you're throwing. So now that we are in COVID, we have half the wheels. So we just have 3 on each side rather than 6. I discussed our new glaze buckets with a volunteer who's concerned that there are bumps on the bottom of the bucket, and this will affect how well they can be mixed. Her concern is valid, but there are limited bucket options available in the size we need, so we'll have to make do with these ones. I suggested using our long-handled toilet brush for stirring those buckets in order to thoroughly scrape all the glaze from the bottom. So we have this really long-handled, it's like 3 or 4 feet long toilet brush that is used for mixing the glazes, because all of our glazes are in these big kind of garbage can containers. And so that can help to the toilet brush bristles can help to get all the glaze from the bottom of the bucket and mixed into the glaze. I heard back from our supplier about the mix-up of supplies. We're going to do a switcheroo. They'll send down the right items and have the wrong items picked up by the courier. I boxed up the return items and put them at the front desk for pickup. Then I helped a drop-in deflocculate a colored slip that she was using for image transfer. The slip was either too thick or too watery. Deflocculating was just what it needed to become thin, but not watery, like magic. And I used Darvan 7 in case you're wondering what I used to deflocculate her slip. Then I replaced the expired cartridges on my half-face respirator. We replace them every 6 months, and we write the expiry date on them when we replace them. So I work for the municipal government. So we have very kind of standardized rules about respirators. And so the rule for us is that we replace our cartridges every 6 months. I asked our occupational health and safety guy whether that's a standard across the board. We use them fairly regularly, like a few times a week sometimes. And so he said 6 months is about the max that he wants us to be using them. He said if you were using your respirator less frequently, that the cartridges would last longer. So if you're only using your respirator a couple times a month, then your cartridges maybe would last for about a year. And so I would, but we write the expiry date on the cartridges when we open them so that we know when we need to replace them. Okay, so now it's lunchtime on day 1. Then after lunch, I had some shopping to do at a few stores around town. I bought 18 large yellow sponges, 2 long-handled spatulas for scraping the sides of glaze buckets, 1 box of disposable gloves, and 3 special flexible paint mixer attachments for mixing glazes in buckets with bumpy bottoms. So I wish I had a picture of it, but it's this paint mixing attachment that we attach to our drill, and it's kind of got these plastic fingers on the bottom. So they're kind of flexible. And so when we have those buckets with the bumps on the bottom, they kind of can get in and mix up the glaze like around those bumps on the bottom of the bucket. So I grabbed a few of those to deal with our new glaze buckets with the bumpy bottoms. And so that was it for day 1. And I drove home. And then I came back the next day for day 2. I had a much better commute this morning. It only took an hour and 10 minutes to get to work. I listen to podcasts while I drive, so I do enjoy the drive, but sitting in my car for over an hour is a little hard on the back. My volunteer was there when I arrived, already unloading the bisque kiln. Like a lovely volunteer. Today is registration day for our winter-spring programs, so I checked in on our drop-in registration numbers when I got to work. Registration opened at 6 a.m. and both the winter and the spring programs were full by 6:07. So in 7 minutes, we filled 120 spots in our drop-in program. So it's very competitive. Everybody, it's not competitive. It's kind of the luck of the draw. Everyone wakes up super early. They log into their accounts, and then right at 6 a.m., they're clicking the button to add the program to their cart. There's always more people trying to get in than we have space for. And so it's kind of a crapshoot, whether or not you get in, how fast your internet connection is, all these things. It's kind of, we just can't meet the demand for people that want to use the studio. So there's always people that are disappointed that they didn't get in and they end up on the wait list. So that is an issue that we have in Victoria. We could really do with some more public pottery studios. So by 8 a.m., they each had over 30 people on the wait list. Most of our classes were full with wait lists as well. This is normal for us, but it does lead to disappointment when people can't get into our programs. We're always trying to brainstorm new ways to expand our offerings, but our space is limited. Then I responded to some emails, including one request for a spray booth tutorial. Given the busy time of year, I won't be able to offer one until January. So all of this was happening in December of 2019. I had a meeting with our center manager, our maintenance supervisor, and another technician about the possibility of purchasing a new Blau front loader kiln. If you've never heard of them, look them up. They're amazing for many reasons. 5 years of loading and unloading top loader kilns has taken a toll on my lower back, and I've needed physiotherapy due to a recurring injury. Since there's really no ergonomically safe way to load top loader kilns, we're looking into other options. Our new Blau kiln, if it gets approved, will have a track to roll out the shelving so we can safely load the kiln without having to lean in or bend at the waist. On top of that, these kilns are very efficient with their energy use, which is aligned with our municipality's green initiatives. They can also be loaded and unloaded in under 24 hours, compared to the 48 to 72 hours it takes for the kilns that we have now. This will increase firing capacity, so people are waiting less time for their pots and we can get lots of work through the kilns quickly. Not to mention, we'd be able to program automatic gas reduction firings instead of manually monitoring and adjusting them for 10 hours each time. Fingers crossed that this goes through and we have a nice, new, efficient, and ergonomic kiln by the end of 2020. So that's on hold, but hopefully that will go through in the future. So this is our kiln room. We have 2 cone art top loader electric kilns here. We have 1 Fredrickson front loader electric kiln here. And then in the back, we have a Bailey gas kiln. And so these top loader kilns, the cone art kilns, the bricks are 2.5 inches thick. And so they retain the heat really, really well, which also means, so from the time that I load this kiln to the time that I unload it, 2 days have gone by. So I would load the kiln on a Wednesday and then it gets unloaded on Friday. So that's how long it takes to fire and then naturally cool to where we can unload it. This front loader Fredrickson kiln, the bricks are even thicker. And this kiln takes 3 days from load to unload. And so if we load it on a Wednesday, we're not unloading it till Saturday. So the Blau kiln that we've been looking into, you can actually program a cooling cycle. So you can tell it how long you want it to take to fire and then how long you want it to take to cool. And so it has fans and dampers, and it can safely fast cool your kiln by like adjusting, like turning the fan on and the heat and making sure it doesn't cool too quickly, but it cools consistently yet quickly. And so we would be able to load the kiln on Wednesday and then unload it on Thursday and load it back up again. So that is one of the like for the output of the studio, that is one of the benefits of these Blau kilns, is that you can program their cooling cycle and control how fast they cool. So then I loaded a bisque kiln and then organized the kiln room a little bit, moving some of our warped kiln shelves off of our shelf racks to make room for the 4 new shelves that arrived last week. I checked on the gas kiln witness cones at the request of another technician who loaded the gas kiln. The cones were a little bit up from the peephole, so she wanted to make sure that I'd be able to see them during the firing. I wrote her a note that they were just fine. So this is our Bailey gas kiln when it's empty. And then this is it when it is full, or almost full. Then I went through the oops shelf and cleared out pots that had been there for over a month. The oops shelf is a place where we put pots that don't meet our firing requirements. Reasons your pots might end up on the oops shelf. If your piece doesn't have your initials and your class code on the bottom, so every class has a code, and then all of the drop-in users have a code. If your piece doesn't have your initials and your code on it, then it doesn't go into the kiln because when we're unloading the kiln, we have hundreds of pots that we have to sort onto different shelves. And so we can't do that if we don't know where the pots belong. So if you don't have your code on your piece, then it gets left out of the kiln with a little note saying to put your code on, and then we will fire it. Or your piece could end up on the oops shelf if you have glaze on the bottom of your piece that needs to be wiped off. So we don't do that for people because they need to learn. And so leaving their pots out of the kiln is sometimes a good lesson to check the bottoms and make sure all the glaze is wiped off before it goes into the kiln. And another reason is if your glaze comes too close to the bottom and you need to wipe it back a bit, we will leave that out so that your piece doesn't stick. And then your glaze is cracking and falling off because it's too thick and you need to rinse and start again. So we're not going to fire pieces that have glaze bits that are falling off. So we'll put those on the oops shelf and then they can try again. And that is good for us because it doesn't damage the kiln or the glaze doesn't stick to the kiln shelf. And then it's also good for the person who made the pot because a cracking glaze is likely to crawl and then they would be disappointed with their glaze results. So we leave pre-printed notes with each piece explaining what needs to happen before we will fire it. We write the dates on these notes and give people a month to fix their pots and move them back to the firing cart. If they're still there after a month, they get recycled if possible, or thrown away if not. Then I had a discussion with our building maintenance supervisor about the possibility of offering soft plastic recycling. So many clay bags get thrown away because we don't offer a soft plastics recycling service. He told me that it was a possibility and he would look into getting a bin put in the studio. So that happened. We're a year and a bit down the road, so we did get soft plastic recycling in the studio. So thumbs up for that. Then I took my lunch break, and then Wednesday afternoon, I prepared the pug mill so my volunteer could pug the clay that evening. Our pug mill will mix 250 pounds of clay at a time. We first fill the mixing chamber with clay from our big reclaim bin. This clay is often very wet, so we add dry clay to balance out the moisture content. I add a recipe of dry fire clay, ball clay, and EPK to the mixer. This not only absorbs the excess water, but it increases the plasticity of the clay by introducing small, medium, and large-sized clay particles back into the clay body. So fire clay is a large particle clay. Ball clay is medium size, and then EPK is a small particle size clay body. So when you have even or like well-distributed particle sizes, then the clay particles kind of fit within each other. It's called particle packing, and that increases the plasticity of the clay because it increases like the point of contact between all the clay particles. If you want to read more about clay plasticity, check out this article that I wrote about clay recycling. So that blog post is called A Low-Tech System for Recycling Clay or something. And in that blog post, I explain clay particle sizes and short clay and how plasticity works and all of that. So if you're interested in that, you can check that out. The article is about my home recycling system. I use a different system at work because I have access to different equipment, and I also can't control what gets thrown into the reclaim bin. So this is our Peter Pugger clay mixer / pug mill. So the clay goes in the top here, and then it gets mixed and mixed and mixed, and then it comes out the side. So this doesn't have a vacuum, like it doesn't pull the air out of the clay. So the clay, it all still needs to be wedged and that, but we do a few of these per week, especially during summertime with kids camps and stuff. So we recycle a lot of clay, and then all the recycled clay, we either sell it at a discount or we use it for all of our kids' classes. Then I oiled some stiff glaze bucket wheels. Our glaze buckets are stored on bucket dollies with wheels that get wet and rusty over time, which prevents them from rolling freely. Every now and then, the bearings need a bit of oil. Then I helped a drop-in user with a loose Giffen grip. It kept loosening its grip every time she stopped the wheel from spinning. I explained that coming to an abrupt stop will often shake it loose, and by stopping gradually, it will stay snug. I also decided that it's probably time for a new Giffen grip for the studio because the one we have is probably the first model ever made and we are due for an upgrade. So we did get a new Giffen grip for the studio. I explained to a drop-in user why some people cover their pots with a bed sheet before wrapping in plastic. When you just have plastic on your pots and the water evaporates, it can collect on the underside of the plastic and then drip back into your pots. By covering them with a piece of fabric, the moisture in the atmosphere around the pots under the plastic is more homogenized and the pots can dry more evenly. Then I contacted Pottery Making Illustrated to get an invoice for our subscription, and then I made a task list for volunteers before going home. So that is it for my day 2 of my 3-day work week. Now we'll move on to day 3. I checked through the new winter-spring drop-in list to see who will need a studio orientation. I made a list of new registrants who haven't had an orientation yet for our program technician to call and email and get them registered. A 1-hour studio orientation is mandatory before you're granted unsupervised access to the studio. 2 previous pottery classes is also a requirement to register for our drop-in program. I brought over some clay pugs from our storage closet to the clay room for easy access. So these are all of our pugs that come out of the pug mill, and then we just date them based on the day they were pugged, and then first in, first out, that type of thing. So many pugs. Shelves and shelves of pugs. Since a bunch of classes are finishing soon, I created and printed some slips with a schedule of times when beginners can come to finish their glazing with a teacher present. At the end of each 6-week pottery class, we offer another 2 weeks to finish glazing because not everything is out of the bisque kiln by the last class. Experienced students can come do their glazing independently during our drop-in hours, but we offer a few windows of time where there's an instructor present to help beginners. Then I emailed the teachers to let them know about the beginner glazing times so they can let their students know during their last class. I restocked our studio supply of Band-Aids, very important. I loaded a glaze kiln. I should probably have gone for lunch since it was after 1 p.m., but I really like getting the kilns done before lunch, so I know the most important task of the day is done. So then I took my lunch. And then after lunch, I didn't have much time left in my day. I made some white slip for the studio, and then it was time for me to go home. And that is all for the week. I'd say that's a fairly typical 3 days at the studio. Every week is different, of course. There are always kilns to load, clay to recycle, and glazes to mix. But each week, there are new problems to solve, new things to fix, and new ways to improve the studio. I hope you enjoyed this behind-the-scenes look into my job as a studio technician. And if you're running a studio and have any questions about how we run ours, please don't hesitate to ask in the comments. I'm happy to share. So thank you all for joining me today. Angela says hi. And Joan, thank you. So I hope that was helpful or interesting, at least. So those are kind of just like some exciting, some very mundane tasks that we do as a ceramic studio technician for a public pottery studio. So if there are any questions, I am happy to answer them. Hi, Sandra. And otherwise, I will let you go on with your day. I'm so glad that you guys joined me live here, and I will be back next week with another ceramic story time with Sue. So I'll see you then.